We need a major crisis to get rid of all the awful stuff that's been going on within the geopolitical and financial community for the last 20 odd years.
I'm joined again this month by Simon Hunt of Simon Hunt Strategic Services. He's an expert in the copper markets, but also an expert in geopolitics. And this is a really interesting time for us to be having this conversation, Simon, because we are looking at what's going on in the mainstream media and we're trying to make head or tail of what is actually happening. There are some changes in some very old alliances. We've got tension, we've got some hot wars, we've got geopolitical tension like we've never seen before, or at least not since probably the Cuban Missile Crisis and the Vietnam War. What is going on at the moment? Where should we be putting our attention and focus? What can you tell us that'll help us to understand what's really at play here rather than what we're being told?
That's a very good question. Not easy to answer. We have to look beneath the surface to really find out what is going on, because the media posts what you want to hear, which is mostly BS, and hides the real truth. So our take is as follows. And the question is, where do I start? And I think the best place to start is the big picture. And that is that Washington has woken up to the fact that BRICS group of nations is emerging as a real threat to America's dollar domination and political hegemony. So in order to disrupt, if not to destroy BRICS, there are a number of tools which Washington is using. The first one is that they see Iran as being the weak link in the alliance that exists between, and a very strong one at that, between Russia, China, and Iran. So kill off Iran, and we can deal a blow to the emergence of the BRICS group of nations as a threat to us.
And just when you say kill off Iran, what do you mean by kill off Iran? Is this boots on the ground?
I mean, literally that.
Right.
Literally destroy Iran, create the foundations for domestic upheaval, which brings about regime change. The problem with that thinking is that regime change can only happen from internal forces. And what the attack on Iran has done, contrary to the public view, is that it has united everybody, young and old, in Iran behind the supreme leader and the military. So the attack was counterproductive in that respect. What we also have to look at, and I'm now going to tread on delicate lines, so you'll have to take my hints. If you look back at Israel, the founding fathers of Israel were America, UK, and France, basically all through one family. And that family and their flock, as it were, controls Trump, controls policy. So what we're seeing is that what Israel is doing and has been doing has the full support of America. So the next step, so let's just take one step further back. Nearly all of the Israeli and American attacks on Iran created superficial damage, not destroying Iran's defense capabilities or their nuclear centrifuge program. In contrast to that, Iran's retaliation on Israel created real damage such that Israel has never encountered before. So that leads us to where we are today. And it is very likely that before the end of this year, there will be a renewed attack on Iran jointly by America and Israel. What is also happening is there's a big focus by those two countries on Pakistan, because in the recent conflict between India and Pakistan, Pakistan, with its fighter jets from China, pilots trained in China, and China's radar system took on India's French fighter jets and America's radar systems supported by India's own ones. And the conclusion of that dogfight that occurred, air dogfight that occurred, was that Pakistan shot down the 6 Rafale fighter jets at a distance of 150 kilometers.
Wow.
Now it's perceived that Pakistan could be a risk to what Washington would like to see as an American-controlled Eurasia. So there is thinking going around that Israel and India, supported by America, will attack Pakistan. I think that is a bit more than rumor, but it's not fact. It's thinking. So I think the big picture in the Middle East is that Israel, supported by America, is pursuing its age-old policy of creating Greater Israel. Greater Israel includes, includes subverting Syria and Lebanon to the Israeli cause. The recent Israeli bombing in Syria is really a message to the HTS-led government in Syria. We are the boss, so watch out. So what we should conclude is that, again, before the end of the year, we are going to see a renewed combined America-Israel attack on Iran. And it's from America's point of view, it has a dual function of supporting the Israeli cause and, if successful, helping to destroy the continuation of BRICS group of nations as a threat to America.
Do you think that the strength that Iran actually showed and the damage that they inflicted on Israel was a cause to pause for thought in terms of their strategy? As I don't believe that Israel was actually expecting the ferocity of the response and the damage that was done. That this has caused a temporary setback for them, and
Yes,
rethinking the
no
strategy there.
question. No question at all. And obviously, they are developing their new strategy and what it's going to be, which I'm guessing now it will include more American support,
Okay. So
covertly or overtly.
right. Okay. So we're going to look out for the news cycle, particularly the US news cycle, to see if that actually starts to come through in it as and supporting this premise. You haven't, in all the discussion there, you haven't as of yet mentioned Russia. Where does Russia fit into this scenario?
Good question. Well, first of all, the leaders of Russia, China, and Iran are in constant and continuous dialogue with each other on policies towards America and the West, and nothing evolves until there's an agreement between the 3 countries. So basically, we can conclude that each of those countries knows that America is after them, and thus it is better for the 3 to stand firm together rather than having America hitting one individually. So, coming back to Iran, what it means is whatever happens to Iran, China and Russia are fully behind them. And in fact, Iran had more support from China during the last confrontation than we have been led to believe. So that leads us to the next part of the story, which is Ukraine. Washington has always seen Ukraine as a stepping stone into Russia. The ultimate objective, and this goes back to even 1946 and certainly since 1995, it has always been the policy of dismembering Russia, splitting it into 4 or 5 domains, and thus gaining control of Russia's huge energy and agricultural resources. That is what the Maidan Revolution was really all about. The situation now is that Putin has taken the gloves off from a very restraining attitude that he has followed since 2022, realizes fully what is America's objectives, and has been under pressure domestically to defeat NATO. So the current we can see is that Russia wants control one way or another over all of Ukraine, not just to the Dnieper River, because that does not give Moscow sufficient warning of any impending nuclear attack. So what we will see now is that the main forces will be moving towards the Dnieper River and beyond. There's another group of forces in the northeast, which will probably move on Kiev. And there's another group in the south, which will move on Odessa. So once Putin has control of what he wants in Ukraine, he will be prepared to sit down and negotiate a treaty with Putin. The problem with that is that the EU, led by the UK, France, and Germany, wants the war in Ukraine for various reasons to continue. And there is reports that at some point before the end of the year and probably in the late summer, that these 3 countries will send physical troops into Ukraine. Then you have to look at what Trump has said. We will be sending military equipment into NATO that the EU will pay for. Whether this includes long-range ballistic missiles is a different question. There are also reports that some already exist in Ukraine and that Russia is seeking them out.
Okay.
We've already been seeing hypersonic missiles destroying Ukrainian military depots.
We've had
So the bottom line, as well as seeing escalation in the Middle East conflict, we will see an escalation in the war in Ukraine, both before the end of this year.
Okay. We've had a question in from one of our viewers, which is, cast your mind forward to 2030. If you had a whiteboard, what way do you think that the geopolitical landscape looks at that stage? And then secondly, as a follow-up to that, what does this all mean for financial markets?
Excuse the laughter. Both very, very good questions. Whether it's 2030 or about 5 years later, difficult to say. But we need a major crisis to get rid of all the awful stuff that's been going on within the geopolitical and financial community for the last 20 odd years.
And into that, when you say the financial community, what specifically are you talking about? All of the awful stuff.
Well,
what do you mean by that?
Debt. take a simple example. In America, it took $0.64 of credit to create $1 of GDP growth. Last year, it took $3.64 of credit to create $1 GDP growth.
Totally unsustainable.
That's unsustainable. Can't go on like that. So we need a major crisis. That major crisis is going to be a war. And it's going to be a war between, do we evolve into a multipolar world, or do we retain the unipolar world led by America? That's the basic thing. And I think that war happens probably around 2028. It could even happen earlier. It could, but that's not a forecast. What happens beyond that is we go back to a world where equity rather than debt is the driver of growth. We go back to the average GDP global growth since 1900, which was about 4%. And we go back to a stable world. But in order to get into that stable world, we've got to go through this crisis first.
Right. And then in the meantime, so how does somebody prepare themselves financially, protect themselves financially?
Well, I think the first piece of advice that I would give is that you play the short-term cycles, you don't invest long-term. And these cycles are going to be very violent and probably pretty short, not extending beyond 18, 24 months, both on the ups and on the downs. And what I'm wrestling, being honest, what I'm wrestling with at the moment is our base case has been that the world is moving into a recession by the end of this year, and that the Fed and central banks and governments will throw everything into the sink to kick the can down the road once more, and probably for the last time. So that starting around mid next year, we go into basically stagflation, say 2% growth, but 4% inflation. Time we get into 2027 is going to be double-digit inflation, not only in America, but globally.
Mm.
That's been our base case, so that you get into 2020, late 2027, 2028, then the wheels come off the whole system, because you'd have had double-digit inflation, which means that long-term bonds, 10-year US treasuries will be yielding in double digits also, which means you crash an indebted system. But what I'm wrestling with at the moment is, do we actually, if what I describe happens, do the people who control the money bags no longer are able to control events? And I suspect this is the game that Russia and China are playing.
In what way?
To encourage the emergence of an economy that does not help America and her allies. In other words, whatever the central banks and governments do will be superseded by whatever China and Russia do, so that you can forget recovery.
So the central banks effectively
They've
lose control.
lost control.
And would you
So,
suggest,
so I'm being very honest and open. This is what I'm wrestling with at the moment. Do we have this inflation takeoff, or do we actually, by the end of the year, start sinking into recession/depression because of mounting geopolitical tensions and frailty within the Western world's financial system? And the one interesting comment on that I would make is that the Boston Fed came out with a report recently stating their concern of the extent of the banking system's support through loans, etc., to the private credit system in America, which their fear is that on any downturn in the American economy, this could create a systemic risk. So there is real frailty within the US financial system, let alone the European and Japanese.
Do you think the current battle between Powell and Trump's threats to fire Powell and effectively put somebody in there that he knows will do what he wants or what the administration wants? Do you think that's all part of it?
I think it was an attempt, and from what I read from somebody today, he had actually drafted a letter to Powell, but various Senate and Congress people persuaded him not to send it. But by law, can he actually fire a sitting chairman of the Fed?
Hmm.
I believe he can't.
It seems that he's just trying to make that position so uncomfortable that Powell will.
Well, yeah. But Powell is a lawyer.
Hmm.
And I don't think that he would allow himself to be dismissed unless there were real reasons for it. So I think, let's put it another way. I think the fact that he was considering this underscores his concerns for the financial system and for the economy. I think that's the real message that comes out of this.
Okay.
The problem is the Fed can only influence short-term rates, can't influence long-term
Indeed,
rates.
indeed.
And the bond vigilantes won't give up.
What's the canary in the coal mine going to be? Where do we need to be keeping an eye on? Is it long-term rates? Is it the banking system? Are we looking to see if we're seeing
Well, I think the bottom line is long-term rates.
right? So we're about 4.5% in the long term. So we can keep an eye on that now and seeing
Yeah.
that seeing
And
that tick up.
our take on 10-year treasuries can go a little bit higher, and then we will see a temporary fall by the middle of next year to around 3%. And from that moment onwards, it's heading higher till we hit around second half of 2027, 2028, double digits.
Wow.
That's what I'm saying. It's stormy times ahead, and don't invest for long term. You just have to play the cycle, which actually comes back with rising geopolitical tensions. Households should be holding physical gold.
So Simon, apart from physical gold, what else is going to be important for people to have, to hold, to own, to have access to?
Food, I think, is the most important thing because that's what you live on. And food prices are going to soar, not only because of the war against Russia, which is a huge source of food, but weather conditions are going to help create serious food shortages. The one which could start appearing or should start appearing next year is the 90-year Gleisberg cycle, which 90 odd years ago created the US Midwest Dust Bowl years. And the Midwest is a major source of food supply, particularly for America. So my advice to everybody is hold in your deep freezers as much food as you can. And if you have gardens, convert some of them to vegetable gardens. You got to be self-contained.
Makes a lot of sense. Simon Hunt, that's a perfect place to leave this conversation. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
You're very welcome. Good to chat as
Cheers.
always.